This week, I'm going to be covering a case that is still before the courts. The murder of two young girls sadly put the town of Delphi, Indiana, on the map for many as their story spread far and wide, and the case would go without an arrest until October of 2022, over 5 years later. This story is sad, haunting, and yet another example of every parent's worst nightmare. Hello, my name is Lance, and welcome to episode 145 of Gone But Never Forgotten, the murders of Abigail Williams and Libby German. Abigail Joyce Williams, better known as Abby, was born on June 23rd of 2003 in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and she lived with her mom, Anna, in Delphi, Indiana. Abby has been described by those that knew her as a girl who was shy at first and often quiet in front of people, but once she opened up to you and when she was with her friends, she was anything but quiet. Abby played saxophone in the school band, and she was on the school volleyball team. She attended church with her family, and she was an avid reader. Abby also enjoyed the outdoors, particularly camping, swimming, and riding ATVs, and she also loved doing art, especially photography and drawing. Abby also had a never-ending love for animals, especially her cat Bongo. Liberty Rose Lynn German, better known as Libby, was born on December 27th of 2002 in Lafayette, Indiana, to her parents Derek German and Carrie German Timmons. Libby was a member of the band at school, and she also was a member of the volleyball team. Libby enjoyed playing volleyball, softball, and swimming. She also enjoyed painting, doing crafts, and going on vacations. Libby had 4 sisters, Kelsey German, Glenna Myers, Alexis Timmons, and Hayden Timmons. Libby was described by friends as a band geek and someone who was incredibly smart and equally outgoing. She loved science class and had even been inspired by her science teacher to become a science teacher herself one day. Abby and Libby were both in the 8th grade and had become fast and great friends since becoming teammates on the 7th grade volleyball team. Both girls also played softball together. Abby and Libby lived in Delphi, Indiana, which is located 20 minutes northeast of Lafayette. The population hovers around 3,000 people. Sadly, the tragic story of Abby and Libby that we are about to talk about is the thing that sprung the small community into the national limelight for all of the wrong reasons back in February of 2017. Their tragic story took place on February 13th of 2017. The day was unseasonably warm for that time of year in Indiana, and Abby, who was 13 at the time, and Libby, who was 14 at the time, decided that they wanted to go for a hike and go visit the Monon High Bridge that went over Deer Creek. The two girls were dropped off by Libby's older sister, Kelsey, on County Road 300 North, just east of the Hoosier Heartland Highway, around 1:35 p.m. At 2:07 p.m., Libby posted a photo of Abby walking on the bridge on Snapchat, and that would tragically wind up being the last sign of either girl being alive. At 3:15 p.m., arrangements had been made for the girls to meet up with Libby's father, Derek, to catch a ride home, but they were not there when he arrived to pick them up. After waiting a short time and not being able to contact the girls, Derek contacted family members of both girls, and everyone descended on the area to look for them. When no sign of the girls could be found, the police were contacted about 2 hours later, around 5:30 p.m., and Libby and Abby were reported as missing. Authorities quickly descended on the area, and they made a search of the immediate area, but could also not find any sign of the two girls, nor any evidence that there had been any foul play in the area. Investigators initially then did not suspect that there was any foul play involved in the disappearance of the girls, and at 11:45 p.m. the search for the girls was called off, and Sheriff Lazenby said that they had no reason to believe that the girls were in any imminent danger, and that crews would resume searching in the morning. The families, as you would expect, continued to search the area for their two young daughters. The searches did resume in earnest in the early hours of February 14th, and sadly just before noon, the bodies of the two young girls were found about 800 meters, or half a mile, from the Monon High Bridge. The bodies were found on the north bank of Deer Creek on a piece of private land. The land belonged to a man named Ron Logan. On the following day, February 15th, the Indiana State Police started to circulate a still image of an individual who had reportedly been seen on the Monon High Bridge trail, near where Abby and Libby had been murdered. The grainy photograph would show what appeared to be a Caucasian male who had his hands in his pockets, had his head down, and was walking on the trail bridge. A few days after that image was circulated, the unidentified man in the photo was named as the prime suspect in the double homicide. At this point, investigators did have very little to go on, aside from that image. A week later, on February 22nd, law enforcement released an audio recording that had the voice of a man that they said was believed to have been the voice of their suspect. The audio file came from Libby's cell phone, and it was said that Libby was a hero for having the wherewithal to hit record on her phone. In the audio file, the voice was muffled, but it sounded as though a man was telling someone to go down a hill. At the news conference that this information was played at, investigators did say that they had more evidence and more information in the case, and particularly from Libby's phone, but they were not going to release anything further as they feared that it could compromise their investigation and a future trial. A reward was also offered up in the case for information that led to the arrest and prosecution of the suspect. At this point in time, that reward was $41,000 US. Oftentimes, when people hear about the fact that investigators are withholding information in a case, people get angry. Many people don't understand that key evidence can be a double-edged sword. As gawkers, like us true crime fans are, we want to know everything. Families of victims also want to know everything, and it can be a real sore spot when details are not released, especially in cases where a suspect is not yet in custody. However, the main reason that investigators often say that they're withholding is because A, certain details not being released helps the investigation weed out false confessions, because there are details about the crimes that only the person involved would know. And second, of course, having all evidence out, as mentioned, can severely impede a trial and convictions in the future for the same reason. Defense teams can state that the charged only knew about certain details because they were public knowledge. Unfortunately, though, the evidence that the investigators were armed with was still not enough for them to make arrests or to make charges, or even to proceed with much more than investigation, and days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months in the investigation. Within the first 4 months, investigators said that they had received around 18,000 total tips in the case, and they were still continuing to receive 4 to 5 new tips every day. Abby and Libby's murders had certainly become viral in the area, across the country, and even around the world. Everyone wanted to try to help with this investigation, and everyone wanted to see someone brought to justice for the senseless murder of the two young girls. The reward money was also representative of that, as the offered amount had climbed as high as $234,000 US. At that point in the case, investigators were making it clear also that this was not a cold case, and this was not going to become a cold case. There were 14 investigators working the case every day from across the FBI, the Indiana State Police, the Delphi Police, and the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. They were constantly following up on tips that came in and seeking new evidence in the case, looking for that one fact that would enable them to make an arrest. As we've talked about in the past, there were many rumors in this case and many theories that sprouted up about who was guilty in the murders of these two young girls. One of the first names that came up, of course, was the man that owned the land that the two girls were found on, Ron Logan. One of the reasons that many people believe that he may have had something to do with the case was the fact that he'd actually been arrested on the same day that Abby and Libby's bodies were found on his property. The fact was, though, that he had actually been arrested on charges for driving on a suspended license. He had, of course, been interviewed by investigators at the time, but he was never considered to be a suspect in the murders at all. 5 months after Libby and Abby were murdered, police distributed a composite sketch of someone that was being sought as a prime suspect in the case. The sketch had been drawn up by eyewitness accounts of a person that had been hiking on the Delphi historic trails on the day that the girls had gone missing. The FBI at this point advised the public to be on the lookout and reporting tips to them of people who had made any drastic changes in their lives or habits or personalities in the time since February 13th. Some of the things that the FBI warned people to be on the lookout for were drastic changes to appearance, changes to the way that they used drugs or alcohol, people who had become more anxious or irritable since that time, people who had been following the case obsessively and in ways that were beyond normal, people whose sleep patterns had changed, people who were obsessively mentioning where they were on February 13th, people who had traveled unexpectedly on the day of the murder, or people who had called in sick on or around February 13th. Investigators were starting to strongly believe that their suspect was hiding in plain sight, and that the murders had been committed by someone who lived in or worked in Delphi. Sadly, even with that cry for help and the new sketch, the case still did not press on to an arrest or anything further, and months now turned into years without any solid answers. On April 22nd of 2019, now more than 2 years after the girls had been killed, the Indiana State Police announced that they were taking a new direction in the case, and they released a new sketch of the suspect. And they urged the public to take a look at the new sketch, listen to the audio from Libby's phone, and watch in a short video that was released from Libby's phone how the man walked because he had a significant gait. They again appealed for the public to send in tips, and they again reiterated that they believed that the man that was guilty of these murders was likely living amongst them. They also made a plea at the time for information that could help them find out more information about a vehicle that had been seen parked off of the Hoosier Heartland Highway on the day of the murders. They asked for anyone with information or anyone who had been parked off of the highway to come forward with information. On April 27th of 2021, over 4 years after the murders, investigators announced that they had another suspect that they were looking at as a person of interest in the case. Now, sometimes this can be a ploy to ensure that the public and the guilty party or parties are aware that investigations are still ongoing. However, sometimes this is because someone is being surveilled, and investigators want to see if they will act differently when it's announced. And then finally, after 68 grueling months of investigation, on October 26th of 2022, a suspect was taken into custody and appeared in court 2 days later. The man's name was Richard Allen. On October 31st of 2022, Indiana State Police announced that Richard Allen had been charged with 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Abby and Libby. Richard pled not guilty, and his trial was originally scheduled to start on March 20th of 2023. At the time of his arrest, Richard Allen had been a Delphi resident for at least 16 years, as was shown by property records in the town. Richard lives 2.5 miles away from the trail where the girls were found. It's unknown if he had ever had any direct conversations with Libby or Abby, but he worked at the CVS pharmacy in Delphi as a pharmacy technician. Many people in Delphi have said that Richard was one of the nicest employees and always went above and beyond for customers. Hauntingly, news even came out that when Libby's grandmother came into the CVS store to have photos developed for her funeral, Richard had been the employee that helped her, and he even told her that he wasn't going to charge her for the photos because of the tragedy. So, this is haunting. First of all, to find out that the arrested person did in fact live in your town long before the murders and continued to live there long after the murders is bad enough. But to find out that he was the man that helped with the photos for the funeral for one of those girls, that's something that sends chills down your spine. I cannot even imagine how this would have affected the family. Richard Allen had no other substantial criminal charges on his record, only 2 speeding tickets that were on file. Richard's first trial date was postponed, of course, as they always seem to be, to allow the defense team more time to review discovery materials for longer, as Allen had been appointed 2 public defenders in the case. At the time of Allen's arrest, he was 50 years old. One thing I did want to mention before moving on to some of the developments within the case and the court date is that Abby's grandparents had left a lovely message at the station for investigators that I feel rings true for many of us. As all of us are aware, although sometimes warranted, police do get a bad reputation in general these days. I found this letter from the family of a murdered young girl to be very sobering. It said, quote, "Where are the police when you need them? I have uttered these words whenever a speeding or reckless driver nearly runs me or someone else off the road. Where are the police when we need them? They are here, in Delphi, with us. We pray for your protection, and we are forever grateful for your service." Unquote. We do, of course, live in a world where people comment on not seeing the police on the roads as much as we believe we should, and less than we have in days past. But the reality is that the budgets for our police are being cut, and crime is rising faster than I believe anyone could have expected or than infrastructure can handle. We do need to remember that these men and women put their lives in danger every day, and perhaps they aren't where we want them to be, but they are in fact trying to do what they need to do. Originally, documents in this case were sealed because Indiana law does allow for courts to withhold records in extraordinary circumstances. On November 29th of 2022, though, Judge Francis Gull issued an order to unseal the probable cause affidavit documents that led to the arrest of Allen. The documents held some interesting details. According to the document, there was video footage on Libby's phone that showed one of the girls mentioning the word gun while a man wearing a dark jacket and jeans approached them and ordered them to go down the hill. Investigators believe that the man in the video was Richard Allen. Investigators also found a .40 caliber unused round less than 2 feet from one of the girls' bodies, and in between the bodies of both girls. It was later determined that the round had come from a gun that was owned by Allen. A witness said that they saw a man walking away from the bridge wearing a blue jacket and blue jeans, and that the clothing was muddy and seemed to be bloody also. Another witness had given a description of a vehicle that they said was parked strangely, and in such a manner that the license plate could not be seen. Investigators said that the description of that vehicle from the witness matched a vehicle that Allen owned in 2017. The document also said that Allen had been interviewed in 2017 and that he had admitted that he was on the trail that afternoon for approximately 2 hours. And Allen also revealed in a 2022 interview that he had been wearing a black or blue jacket and that he had gone to the bridge to watch fish. For me, I found this to be particularly damning because of the fact that he remembered what he was wearing when he went to the bridge 5 years earlier. I have a hard time personally remembering what I wore yesterday, so the fact that he would remember such a fact is rather bizarre, to me at least. On December 2nd of 2022, Judge Gall would issue a gag order on the trial until January of 2023, and then the defense attorneys argued that the case should not be held in Carroll County, where Delphi is, because they believed that they would face jury bias because of the extensive media attention that had been given to the case for 5 years. In June of 2023, court documents actually show that Allen confessed to his wife several different times on a prison phone call. He blatantly confessed to her that he had killed Abby and Libby. When that conversation occurred, his wife had abruptly ended the phone call, and that call took place on April 3rd of 2023. In response to that damning information, Allen's attorneys said that any allegedly incriminating statements that their client made should be deemed as unreliable and inadmissible because of his declining mental health since he had been incarcerated. They also requested that Allen be sent to a different facility to escape whatever he was facing where he was. Court documents also show that the girls' injuries were caused by a sharp object, and they had found about a dozen knives, some of which, characterized as switchblade, were reportedly seized as a part of their search warrant at Allen's home. In September of 2023, Allen's defense team accused the investigators of ignoring critical evidence that had been found at the scene of the crime that would link the killings to a group called Odinism. Odinism is an ancient religion that honors Odin, Thor, and other deities from the Norse pantheon. Allen's attorneys claim that members of a pagan Norse religion hijacked by white nationalists had ritually sacrificed Abby and Libby. They said that nothing linked Allen to Odinism or any other religious cults, and they also claimed that 2 groups of Odinists from the Delphi and Rushville area were investigated previously in the wake of the murders because there were multiple ritualistic symbols at the crime scene, including the way that Libby's body was positioned. In response to these claims, the prosecutor, Nicholas McClelland, had called their theory a fanciful defense for social media to devour. It had been said that some of the clues that they believed point to Odinism included sticks placed over Abby and Libby's bodies in the form of Germanic letters that are associated with Odinism, a letter that was painted on a tree with Libby's blood, and also faux antlers that were fashioned out of sticks that were placed above Abby's head. In October of 2023, Judge Gall actually removed both of the defense attorneys from the case because of what he called gross negligence. He said that crime scene photos had been leaked from their office. A staffer would later say that they had leaked the photos and that the attorneys were not aware of it, and their removal was appealed to the Indiana Supreme Court, and the attorneys were reinstated on the case. The case was then bumped back to October 15th of 2024, so we're coming up on this one, finally, hopefully, going to court. So, I hope that this one finally happens, and we get a verdict in the murders of Abby and Libby, and some semblance of closure for their families after what has already, no doubt, been 7 years of absolute hell. In the meantime, people and businesses in and around Delphi have come together to build a memorial park for the girls that is named Abby and Libby Memorial Park, and it includes baseball fields, an amphitheater, picnic shelters, a multi-purpose building, a concession stand, restrooms, and 4 different playgrounds, as well as a walking trail around the facilities. The park is located at 6062 State Road 218 West in Delphi, Indiana. If and when this trial happens, I will certainly give updates on the case as they are available. So this is where I need to leave things for now. I want to end the episode with a quick shill to let you know that we just dropped the 5th patron-only episode of the podcast on Patreon last Monday, and this one covered the shooting of Mary Buttafuoco. This case is, of course, the reason that Joey Buttafuoco and Amy Fisher were catapulted to fame in the same sickening way that we seem to elevate criminals from time to time. For me, this was a case about 2 people I had heard of and did not know their story, so it was a whole new learning experience for me. Celebrity status for people who certainly don't deserve it, if you ask me. The patron-only episode can be accessed at patreon.com/GBNF podcast by signing up at one of our 3 patron levels. You get access to all past and future patron-only episodes, you get to support me and the show, and there are many other perks as well. Please come on over and show some love to GBNF. In the meantime, thank you all for listening. I hope that you appreciate the weekly content and continue to show your support in every way possible. I hope that you and yours are well and continue to be well, and I hope that you all continue to be better. I'll see you next time on Gone But Never Forgotten, as I will be sitting down and recording a second episode with Bailey. Take care.